Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're zooming in from today. My name is Doug Bruhnke. I'm the founder and CEO of Global Chamber. And this event came to me in a dream. It actually, more specifically, came to me as I was rolling out of bed. And I had the very good fortune of having each of these three speakers today over the last couple months share their knowledge and experience and talents, and just it fills my brain with excitement and ideas and thoughts. And so as I'm rolling out of bed, I thought, wow, what if we got Charles Bernard and Suzy Zeng and Selch together? That could be amazing in terms of us understanding better what are some of the things we should be thinking about in our sales strategies and plans. That's something critical for most businesses right now, right? Rethinking, pivoting, coming up with other ideas, not kind of sticking to what used to work, but really rethinking the market. And so I can't think of three better people, whether it's in the dream, whether it's rolling out of bed, or whether it's here right in front of us. And so I'm really glad you're going to be part of history with when these three sales leaders for the first time ever get together and share their thoughts and ideas and do some brainstorming as well. So our conversation is going to start today with Charles Bernard. He's the founder and CEO of Criteria for Success. I've listened to Charles not just at Global Chamber, but on some of the things that Criteria for Success has done. And it just kind of blows my mind in terms of the knowledge he has and the experience he has, and also the way he handles executives in their questions and doesn't guide them and directly guides them in ways that allow them to maintain creativity and thought around their specific business. And that's an art. It really is. And so Charles, really love all the things that you do and really appreciate the fact that you're kicking us off today.
Thank you, Doug. Are you introducing everybody else separately, or do you want to do that now? How would you like to do that?
Oh, one at a time is fine.
Okay. Well, thank you for that very kind introduction. And I've been working diligently with other CEOs, many of which are our clients, former clients, prospects, and I'm part of Global Chamber, and I hear some issues with CEOs there, as well as some other networking and peer CEO groups that I'm involved in. And one of the questions Doug asked me early on in preparing for this was kind of, what am I seeing out there? What are some of the themes? And I'd love Suzy and Zach and other people to jump in and really weigh in on the themes. But I'll tell you what I'm seeing. I kind of break it into 5 areas. What seems to be top of mind at the moment, it has been for a while, but it's gotten very accentuated with COVID, is where is the money? That's the number one problem that I have. Like, who's spending? Where is the money? Who should I be talking to? People who can and are willing to hire me and my company. So that's the number one. Second is why people will buy. Why people buying today? I can answer that question. I want to leave some of the questions unanswered because I'd love Suzy and Zach to weigh in, and other people who want to participate, but I can knock this one off. Why people will buy, in my humble opinion, comes down to 2 main reasons. And one is if they see value in what it is that you're providing. And number 2, if they see a return on investment. And that's a very loaded phrase. I hear that a lot, return on investment. And I just want to guide people, because that's what I'm doing with my clients, to not necessarily focus exclusively on dollars when we say return on investment. It could be return on effort. It could be return on expectations. It could be return on time, efficiency. You got the drill. So that's the second reason. Why are people buying? The third is I need more leads, more at-bats. Am I targeting correctly? Am I targeting the right people? And then when I target correctly and I find my sweet spot, where do I find them? What am I doing? So again, I'm putting that out there as a theme without necessarily answering it right now. The fourth is keeping buyers engaged. That's a big one for me, at least. It's you manage to have someone connect with you, you do a Zoom call, and people's attention spans are, in my opinion, shortening. And so we need to be relevant quickly. So how do we get people engaged is another one. And then lastly, how do I close? You know, I'm hearing a lot about, I'm having great Zoom meetings. People are picking up the phone probably more than they ever were before because people are kind of isolated. They want the contact. I have these great Zoom calls, and then it sort of disappears into the ether and people go radio silent on me. So how do I close? How do I get that buyer to close? Those are the main themes that I've been hearing. I do have a tip I'd love to just throw out there. Doug has heard me, and hopefully this will resonate, that I think the best form of sales that we can practice today is what I call discovery-based selling. And I'll define that in the form of a rhetorical question. And the question is it better for your buyers to be told how great you and your company is, or is it better for them to discover? And usually the response I'm looking for is, we want them to discover value. So I think if we can reframe the way we're bringing our value proposition to the market so that it becomes a discovery process, one way to help people discover is to tell stories and give anecdotes and examples, and then let people fill in the blanks. So that's it. I know that, Doug, you had some questions, but I've taken quite a bit of time, and I'd like to give my, my fellow colleagues on the Zoom enough time to weigh in as well.
That's excellent. Let them discover the value. So basically lay the stories out, and they pick out what resonates with them. What great advice. We always want to just kind of tell them the value, right? This is it. But allowing them to discover it is such a powerful way of approaching it. Suzy Zeng is our next speaker. She's CEO and co-founder of Z-Choice International. Each one of our speakers today has such a unique background, and Suzy's is one that has been mostly in Asia and in so many different retail industries. She's now in the Rocky Mountains, so she's based in the United States, and so she supports a variety of companies, but her background is so rich with experience as all three speakers today, and so unique. And so the reason Suzy is here is because she is such a creative and thoughtful thinker around this topic and others. And so Suzy, we're really pleased to have you here today, and looking forward to your own unique perspective on this challenge of reformulating sales. What do we need to do differently?
Thank you, Doug. I always appreciate you and your unique perspective. Thank you for bringing everybody together. What a critical subject, right? So I've spent 25 years in corporate America and actually touched the North America markets, and some of them are Asia markets, and I definitely connect with European markets as well. I've seen mainly from a CPG perspective, consumer packaged goods, in terms of sales, how to get consumers like our brand to have a repeat trial, and then keep coming back. So I've dealt with traditional classic brands like Kraft Foods and brands from General Mills and PepsiCo's, and most recently the known White Way Foods, they're more of a premium brands. Yes, you're right, Doc, that I can speak more from like the marketing expander and business development perspective. I would probably speak less from a purely sales strategy perspective. The reason I want to come from that angle is because right now I'm also an entrepreneur, as you introduced, and my role is really to engage companies between, especially US and China, help them to navigate and get into the markets both ways. What I find is that people tend to be more technical, more like a techniques focus, and forget our human nature. So I would say, especially during this pandemic, I've seen more people actually rely on online tools for searching information, find about the brands, find about the companies, and even older people, 50 and above. I would say that's the wise ones actually are more comfortable shopping online as well. So I think that is a very interesting trend, especially in the US. If you go to Asia, you see an 80-year-old grab a phone and search something. It's not unusual. But here, because of this pandemic, my 70 years old actually order foods online now, which is kind of a big breakthrough for them. So I would say the number one thing is that something online, people are using that for search information. So if you want to reach to your customers and the consumers, make sure your company website, your brand information is up to date. So that is where people will look for the first place. So the second thing I've seen is because this pandemic, people are really interested in looking for what's in there for them. I think people are more careful with the money, but for critical things, valuable things, to Charles' points, that they are willing to spend, I've seen a lot about health and wellness. You probably heard that all the fitness skills are out of stock, right? So just so you know, that type of products, people are willing to spend on themselves. So that is the second trend. Again, if we can spell out the values to them, especially to what they care about, to the health, wellness, the safety, those are things they can speak to themselves. So the third thing I've seen is that on the contrary, people are, for big services, for them to speak big money, especially related to their own small businesses, they're afraid to commit. So I think that's something Charles talked about as well, is that, yeah, you can have all the Zooms you want, but people are not really closing the deal. It's not necessarily we as a salespeople or a company, our brand don't do a good job. It's because this is a time people have the fear in their head. So, and what's truly behind it is the trust. So yeah, we are virtual, unless I've known you for 30 years, otherwise how I'm going to have the trust just to purchase your products, because I cannot touch you, I cannot really hug you, right? So, and the old fashioned way of building trust is not there, right? For Asian, is about building the trust over dinner, over drink, right? So every country has its own way to build the trust. In the States, if we don't have the hug, I don't know if I really know you, right? So I just want to throw those 3 points out there. That's what I've seen. It's that online information, communication, really critical, and people are interested in value that's really good for them, health and wellness. So as an example, lastly but not least, how do we build the trust? So I'm going to go back to you, Doug.
Thank you very much. Trust. I love trust. And as those of you in the Global Tribe know, this is really what we've established. From the beginning, my vision of Global Chamber was, what if we could become a lot more productive? What, Suzy, you're talking about is, I lived in Japan, right? And so to get change within the company, we'd have to go to dinner 5 times and drink and get drunk and stumble over each other. Or if you're doing a sales, whatever, it takes forever to do anything. And some of that I like. I just don't, I'm of the age where I just don't want that anymore. And so having a trusted network where you can pull the trigger, because if Suzy and I know each other and Suzy recommends I talk to somebody else, and since we trust each other and she trusts this other person, I now trust that third person a lot more. And why can't I do business much more rapidly? And why do I need to have 10 coffees with that person? And it doesn't make sense. And I think clearly that's the way, one of the ways the world has changed. Both of you, though, have talked about the same issue of lots and lots of talk and not being able to get the close, right? So that'll be a recurring topic, I'm sure, today.
I will just comment on the last point you made. I love how you laid it out, right? So this is a point I will make later, because you mentioned, I'm going to just point out real quickly, is that this is how we're going to change our mindset and change how we approach things and pivot to the situation, build trust differently. You're absolutely right. Use venues, use a network like a Global Chamber, use the services that we offer here to create that trust and virtually. So I love that.
Cool. No, we do too, and we've seen the results of it. So, in fact, I haven't told anybody this, not even Cesar, but yesterday or the day before, my wife, who watched me start this, she's the kind of person who, unless it's in her hand, it doesn't exist. And so my dream of Global Chamber has always been largely a dream. But 2 days ago, she said, I think this is going to be really successful. That was the first time she's ever said it in 5+ years. So every entrepreneur can probably relate to that. Many of us are dreamers, and sometimes we interact with people.
When your wife or your mother says that, you've made it, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and I don't want to get overly optimistic about it, but it did feel really good. Our next speaker, as you can see, is Selch. He's the VP of Global Sales at PharmaJet, and he has some amazing content, sales mentor content online. So definitely, if you haven't yet, check that out. Zach, as you can see, is a legitimate member of the global tribe, very literally, with tribal instruments on his wall. And as you'll see in his content online, he's traveled all over the world, over 100 countries. His passport, multiple passports, very, very thick. And what's really cool about Zach is his expertise is around setting up distributorships internationally better than anybody. So before you ever think about doing it, definitely have a chat with Zach, because he's not just really good at it, he takes a different perspective on it. And so he kind of builds a three-legged stool today between these three experts that has a very specific, really deep understanding of success of how to build an international network. And you've even got a book coming out on that topic. So really looking forward to that.
Yeah. And I've just quickly say I'm going to have a book coming out, which I will make available to global members at a huge discount very soon. So
very cool.
Great. So thank you.
Share with us some ideas.
So thank you very much for that intro, Doug. And yeah, I'm going to look at this from a slightly different perspective, but I think all of us were thinking about the same thing here, because if you take a look at selling and you say, well, we've actually maybe even made it easier to get messages across now during the COVID time, because we're using more tools that maybe weren't available before. But if you say that there are really two big parts to selling, there's the building of rapport and trust, and then there's getting that message across. Let's say that the message part is maybe even, we've brought in some tools that make that easier. What we're all getting stuck on, and where everybody around the world is having problem with, is building rapport and trust when you can't do all the activities. Suzy said hugs. I hadn't even thought about that. Americans are the easiest people in the world to make trust with. When you take a look at the cultural aspect, essentially, you go into a store and somebody's wearing a blue shirt and you hand them your credit card, right? Because you're say, okay, this guy must be, a sales manager at Best Buy. He's wearing a blue shirt. I'm going to give him my credit card, right? We trust people automatically. And in most cultures, like you mentioned with Japan or Africa or most places, what we're basically saying is, well, to establish trust, there is a path, and it's going to take a while. There are things you have to do, etc. And most of those things we can't do. But where are we with this? Now, one interesting thing is, one thing that establishes trust is when you understand the other person's concerns and problems, right? And I always look at that like Charles talked about discovery calls. I always say, well, if you can ask a question in your discovery that your customer knows from your question that you understand his workday, you've established a lot of trust right there, right? Now, what do we know? Everybody in the world right now is concerned about COVID. We actually have an opportunity where we know, you know, they used to, when you're like a 22-year-old salesman, your sales manager says, go into his office, look around. If he has a golf trophy, ask him about golf. If he has, you know, a picture of a sailboat, ask him. We're struggling to try and figure out what to talk to your customer about that's going to establish trust. But we know right now, everybody in the world is concerned about the same thing. Are my kids going back to school? Are my parents safe, right? Those type of things. So on the one hand, we have that. Now here's the other part of that is right now, every salesman in the world, every salesperson in the world is saying, oh my God, nobody is following my timetable. My boss wants me to close a deal this month, but everybody's worried about something that I don't have a solution for, right? And we're all in that boat. But how do we, what's the best way you can possibly establish trust, in my opinion, is to be able to say to people, hey, I know, you know, I know that you don't want to be talking about changing your copy paper right now because you're dealing with COVID. I understand that. We're all dealing with this. I'm just, you know, keep in mind, I'm here for you. And let's talk about this when things calm down a little bit, right? When, you know, everybody has an opportunity right now to leverage that. You know, you have two ways of looking at it. You can go in and say, hey, I know there's COVID, forget about COVID. I need a purchase order from you. Give me a purchase order. And that's going to get you absolutely no place. That's going to crush any trust or rapport you have. Or you can go in and you can say, look, we're all in this boat together. I understand. I don't expect you to give me a purchase order now because this is not your concern right now. Let's talk again in 60 days, right? And by doing that, you are automatically building up trust. You're establishing that you understand what these people are worried about. Now, let me talk about this from another perspective, specifically with international, and honestly, specifically with me, I think we're going to see a lot more using channels, because what Doug said was, if I don't have a relationship with this guy, can I leverage somebody else's? And that's what channels are all about. Can I get the right partner who has a pre-existing relationship, and by working with that partner, can I leverage that relationship because I can't get on a plane right now, right? And I think what we're going to see is I've always said that the best way for an American manufacturer of under about $500 million in sales to grow internationally is to leverage partnerships. But I think that's going to become more and more important. And what we're also going to see, I believe, is, you know, both Doug and myself, and I don't know about Suzy and Charles, but I know that Doug and myself both were sales assets based in other countries, right? And that's how we started out years ago. And I think we're going to see a little bit less of that because it's now become a little harder to take an American and shoot him to Japan or shoot him to Nigeria, right? So if you're going to have to hire somebody locally, and I think what we're seeing, what I'm reading about is a lot more companies are saying, can I get a Japanese regional manager to sell for my company? How do I find him? How do I train him? How do I make him comfortable working for my American manufacturer out of Omaha, right? And again, I think that's going to be something that everybody's looking for. And, you know, since I just happen to be talking right now, I'll say that's something I do. So if you're looking to set up a network of regional managers around the world or channels, reach out and talk to me and maybe I can help you out. But I think we're going to see this as much more common. I think a lot of times, you know, when people were saying, okay, I'm going to get on a plane, I'm going to fly out to Japan and close a deal, people are going to be a little bit more hesitant to do that. And the best way to do that might be to find a guy on the ground, either a channel or a regional manager based on the ground who has those existing relationships.
Got it. Yeah, and we're going to open up the floor now for questions, and I'm going to go back to each of the speakers to get their responses to how each other, what each spoke about. But I want to first ask a question, just kind of building on what you just talked about, Zach, is that distributors almost, it seemed like by definition, meant those people that kind of showed up at their client's office all the time. It's like total personal touch, right? That's a lot of the reasons why big companies used to hire distributors, is to create that personal touch. And now here we are in COVID. And so are these, how do you find people that have, recognized that they can't do that anymore, and that they've got to have pivoted in terms of their behavior to be more effective kind of in this world? What are you seeing out there relative to that issue?
Well, my distributors are still, I think what we're seeing is it's really hard. Like there's no way for me to get to Nigeria right now. There's no way for me to get to Pakistan right now. But my distributor can hop in his car and drive from Lagos to Abuja, right? My distributor can hop in his car and go from Lahore to Islamabad. So my distributors are getting out. And now, granted, it's much harder for them to get FaceTime with people because people don't want that many people in their offices. But if we have the right distributor in place, they are getting out and they're seeing people, which I can't do, right? I literally was stuck in the airport trying to get to Pakistan a while back. There's no way I can get to get to some of these countries, but the distributors can do it, right? They're in most countries, they might have times when they're limited. They might not be able to get into certain offices whenever they want. But for the most part, the distributors are getting around in the same way, that we are talking to people. We can find a way to talk to people, right? We can meet them, outside for a walk if we really have to.
Got it. So you're finding that at least the people that you're dealing with, that instead of like going to have lunch and like a long lunch and doing a sale that way, and then at the end of it, you're kind of wearing them down, that they're adjusting to the new way of conversing, a new way of getting a close, where you don't necessarily have the ability to do that anymore.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing. But again,
Okay.
Look, nothing is easier. Everything is harder, but we got to sell, right? Gotcha.
Charles, going back to you, just kind of circling around, what are your reactions to what you hear from both Zach and Suzy, and are there anything else you'd like to say to build on what we're talking about here?
I think what Suzy and Zach put on the table is right, spot on. With trust, Suzy, I see trust as instrumental, but I'll add another piece, and I think this is where you were going, Doug, and that is trust and vetting. So a real world example is how I got connected to Doug. So there's a guy called Hank who I made a connection with. There was a clear trust there, but he had already vetted Doug by the time I was introduced to him. Now Doug vets another guy who's going to help me with some law work based in Phoenix. Same story. So yes, I'm looking at the trust, but I'm also looking at the vetting, because vetting to me is one level above trust, where not only are you bringing someone to a relationship because you trust them, but you can also say, I know this person, I know their work, I've seen them in action, and I can build that bridge so I can cut some time down for you to discover their value. I can kind of present it for you by vetting that person. So vetting, I think, is very important to add to what I'm seeing based on what Suzy said. And then Zach was really insightful from my perspective on the relationship, physical aspect. And what I'm noticing is it's actually a matter of coordination, because I don't think it's mutually exclusive. Let me explain. So you can have boots on the ground, as I would call it, someone physically there in Islamabad, Pakistan, but all the coordination, all the direction, a lot of the subject matter expertise is coming from Zach. So what I'm noticing that in general, so that was in that one example, but in general, what I'm seeing is, if we explode that out into many businesses, partnering is something that I'm seeing take off. People now are relying on other people who provide additional services, complementary services, value-added services in different cities. So I'm also national, not international, but we have clients in Minneapolis, West Coast, Chicago, down south, all over, right? And having people partner with me to deliver parts of my program or to add to pieces of my program, whether it's physically because they're there in the city, or whether it's because they just add value, is something that I'm seeing a lot. So I hope that adds a little more perspective.
It does. You know, the adding value becomes so important. And Suzy, you finished off by talking about the people being afraid to commit and the difficulty of closing. You know, if you've done a lot of those early steps correctly, you're going to get further along there. I mean, what are your perspectives on what you're hearing? And then particularly how to tackle that really end point problem is, you know, how do you get there faster, ideally, but also how do you get a higher rate of return on those closes?
Yeah, it's definitely a big question, definitely critical, right? So I used the overarching trust, building the trust as a way of getting to our customer and the consumers. But really there are ways to get there. I would just add 3 more ways. I think you all touched on that. In addition, I would say build trust is that, we're gonna reach out to people we already have existing. So that's what Zach and Doug and then Charles, you all mentioned that use the existing trust relationship to get that, so overcome that fear. And something that especially one of the projects that Z Choice is doing for US company going to China is basically we provide a full service. Guess who I reach to? It's the people I worked directly when I was in the ground there 2 or 3 years ago. So that's just already a existing network that already built with the customers and then best way to sales. So the second way I would say is to using companies or services that we may not have direct reach, but they already have. So again, that is similar to the first approach, but is liberally we actually reach out. So in other words, I'm not going to handle everything myself because things already changed, right? So compared to 3 years ago, and also I cannot be in China myself. So guess what? I would go reach out to people who trusted somebody. I think those are 2 points you guys touched. The third way we're building the trust is through more of a, I want to say, official way, a more professional way through partnership. So Z Choice partnership with Food Daily in China, for example, we created this biggest food innovation conference in China. The reason we do that is because that conference allows the professional people come in. So we can vet out, maybe that, Charles, that's your word. We sift through the people and based upon their official records, right? So they got to have a track record. So we know in every single category, either is online sales or it's either cross-border or is it retailers and the different category, and we know exactly how they rank in terms of what's on the book. So then we have people because we link with them directly and they can meet with them in person. And then because my relationship with the Food Daily, so our conference is a very official way to connect all these people in the food industry, for that matter. So we talk about 3,000 food professionals in every single food category, profession in the marketing, brand building, and the wholesaler service render for that. So I would say that would be something I encourage everybody to consider, is to find the right partner and to reach out to the right people. So those are the things I just want to add.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I saw in the Q&A area from Larry Hart about the importance of vetting. I think each of you talked about that in terms of building your network. You, Suzy, just talked about connecting and the importance of using your connections. Zach, in an earlier conversation, I think it might have been in our podcast, he said something that still resonates with me. It's just so profound that he said, the world is a small place. And what he meant by that was that, you know, at the end of the day, if you mess up, people know about it because the number of people doing international business is relatively lower, right? And so the converse or the reverse, what's the English word for that? The opposite of that basically is that if you're really good, people know that as well, or at least a certain number of people. Our goal is always with the global tribe is not enough people very often know about really talented people, and they end up making wrong decisions on people that are not trusted, are not vetted, are not trustworthy. And so, Zach, I really appreciate you sharing that point about how small really the world is. And you've been able to leverage that when new clients come to you and they say, hey, I need this or that help. And you actually do recruiting, right, of distributors and find people to fit. And because your experience and because of your breadth has been so large, you're able now to usually not make a mistake.
Yeah, you know, making a mistake either with a regional manager or with a distributor is very, very expensive. And I think it's one of the biggest mistakes that exporters or people new to growing internationally make. I was saying, you know, I know somebody who they went to a country and their interpreter, they were talking to the interpreter and the interpreter said, you know, it would be really nice to be a distributor. So they said, well, you could be my distributor. And so they gave their distribution for a very large country to somebody who had never distributed anything, never sold anything, etc., signed papers, and that was that. And people do this all the time. It sounds it sounds crazy, but well-educated people do that mistake all the time, right? They don't do the right vetting, they don't do the right search for it, etc., because they don't know how, and they want to find somebody, so they think, well, this is a really nice guy. You know, I can't tell you, I can't tell you how many times somebody has said, well, I met this guy and he knows everybody in Africa and he speaks a whole bunch of African languages, so I'm going to make him my distributor. And I say, well, where did you meet him? Well, he was my Uber driver. You know, and they're like, okay, so if he's driving an Uber in Denver, what makes you think he could be your distributor in Nigeria, right? Why did he leave if he was so good at selling product? Anyway, that's something I encounter all the time because I think, well, a lot of what I do is I fix these mistakes. You know, people will set up really, really bad distribution organizations and they won't get any results. And they'll say, well, maybe my product is overpriced or something for these markets. They won't realize where the problem really is. Yeah.
So this is a critical issue, and I want each of you to address this, and that is beyond all of the things we've been talking about, methodology matters. And more than any other time in history, perhaps, you can't just do that kind of stuff, right? Whether it's selecting a distributor or selecting your sales strategy or plan. Charles, you know, in your case, you have an approach, even though when I watch you, you do a lot of work with Vistage and a lot of work with executives, and they all are very, I'm sure, very strong-minded people, and yet you're able to maneuver them to the right place and they're discovering things on their own. That's a methodology, right? You're using something when you approach somebody, and that's more important than ever, right? They've got to rethink now, and they've been told, hey, whatever you're doing, you need to keep pushing harder and harder. And right now, that's not always the right strategy. So what are some of the methodology things, approaches that you're using now or exploiting now and maybe changing now in your approach to people so that they can come up with some good plans and strategies?
Great question. Before I go there, Doug, I just want to piggyback on what Zach was saying, because in terms of people making big mistakes that are very costly, Where I see that show up in a different world, a different place, not distribution necessarily, is recruiting. So I think that the floodgates are going to open. A lot of people have been laid off, and my world is sales. That's my channel, sales and marketing. But there's going to be a rush at some point for a rehire. And recruiting is one of those places where you end up making a lot of wrong decisions because what I call the bird in the hand concept. Like you've been looking at so many people that have been duds, that haven't made it through the screening process. You're exhausted. You've seen 10 candidates, 20 candidates, and finally you see one mediocre candidate. And that person is a bird in the hand. Well, compared to all the other not talented candidates, that person stands out. And so we tend to cut corners and then discover that we didn't really follow our recruiting process. So back to your question about a methodology. So in recruiting, especially for salespeople, you really should be hiring using a process based on 3 factors, I think: talent, experience, and chemistry. And we oftentimes focus a lot of the interviewing on experience. What have you done? What do you know? Where have you been? What have you produced? Frankly, I think that's the lowest priority because you can always train people. I mean, it's important to have the fundamentals in whatever business you're hiring for. But to me, the number one is chemistry. And because I'll ask you a rhetorical question for the group, how often have we hired talented, experienced people who don't get along with anyone, rip the culture to shreds, destroy all the good work that you've built in developing a team? And so I think chemistry is something we rarely have a process to interview for. And we have a whole process, very simple. I'll tell you quickly: you get on a whiteboard, you ask the person, ask 4 questions, and on a whiteboard, write the response. Because, and again, my world is sales, you want people to demonstrate how they think on their feet, body language, eye contact, presence, responding to challenges and questions. And the 4 questions we ask are: what are your core values? What don't you like to do but will do anyway? That tells you a lot about a person. What is a personal win, personal or professional win, and anything else? And the anything else can be whatever they want to talk about. And then you invite people in to basically interact with that person as they're in a kind of formal presentation setting, responding to Q&A. And that to me is a chemistry test worth its weight in gold. But even above that, and I think this is where your question, Doug, is very intriguing to me. One of the cores of what we provide is a sales playbook, sales and marketing playbook. And there's a lot of debate about what is it, how do I go about, what's the value? Well, I think the question of what's the value has been put to bed. I think we get very little pushback on the value of a sales playbook that has process, behaviors, best practices, philosophy, all of that. It should be in the cloud. We prefer to use a knowledge management system like a wiki, so people can adjust it and adapt to it and change content. And lastly, the biggest change I've seen in terms of process is that more and more, and particularly because of COVID, where there's a lot of fear and doubt and uncertainty and repivoting of the business, sales does no longer belong to the sales department. You might think that's crazy to say, but to me, sales is a company-wide issue now. So the sales VP, to give you an analogy, is no longer, in my humble opinion, when we work with clients, accountable for sales, which sounds crazy, right? It's like, no, you're responsible for sales. You're responsible for developing the team, putting in the best practices. That's all the doing. But the accountability belongs to the company in 6 areas: sales, marketing, human resources, operations, finance, and executive leadership. And now, because you've spread the accountability, where I, who head up operations, have to now have my KPIs, my key performance indicators, tuned in to what am I doing to provide delivery, bandwidth, following up. I'm in operations. Someone sells something. I'm responsible for delivering that thing. I'm responsible for helping the salesperson be knowledgeable about our products and services. So I'm tied to the hip with the sales team. Same with finance. I'm responsible for profit, pricing, comp plans, bonus plans, incentive plans. I'm in human resources. I'm responsible for hiring, training, onboarding, developing. So can you begin to see that because we now have what we call a sales growth team, where each of those functions is represented, your sales VP is not lying to you, which is what they do when you leave them alone, unfortunately. Here's what I mean. That VP of sales, the last week of the last month of the quarter, has brought in a 30% shortfall, and the rest of the organization is like, you were forecasting, we were on track. Oh, sorry, we lost that big deal. Oh, and so to make up the next quarter, because they're so fearful of all that pressure, they go out and try to sell, which diminishes the value of the sales team, because now the sales team thinks the VP. So you can see it creates this vicious cycle. The more you isolate your VP of sales, what we're advocating more and more is develop a process that's company-wide, people can contribute to it. It's a sales playbook that everybody has insights to, and more importantly, everyone's supporting the sales effort, not just one person.
That makes a lot of sense.
So I got to say, Charles, I have a feeling you and I could go out for a beer one time and spend like 6 hours just arguing over that, because I would almost say to some extent, I disagree. I hate to say this in a forum like this, but I think it's part of like the whole thing. I disagree with a lot of that. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on that. I think it's very interesting. I think the process, I think you're 100% right about the process and the playbook. But I always say, like, I had this conversation recently where I said, where somebody said, well, I think you should do such and such in a meeting, a sales meeting. And I said, okay, we disagree on that. And only one of us has ever been in a meeting like that. You've never actually sold anything. So I think we should stick with the way I look at this. And the guy said, what are you crazy? Of course I've sold things. I was a VP in a company that sold $5 billion. And I said, yeah, but your title has never been account manager, regional manager, or sales manager, right? He goes, yeah, but my company sold $5 billion. And I said, yeah, but you have never brought in a purchase order. And what I meant by that was, I've gone about 30 years, say 120 quarters, where every year, every penny I've ever brought in has been associated with a purchase order, right? So for me, if I'm sitting in a meeting and my customer, going back to relationships, I'm talking to somebody and I see something's going on with his mouth that makes me believe that I might lose this deal, my stomach is twisting and my brain is racing. And so you could say, yes, the VP of R&D is part of the whole sales organization, but he's never done that, right? If sales screw up, his kids go to camp, he gets a new car, it doesn't really matter. If I lose a purchase order, I might have to explain to my kids why they're not going to camp this summer, right? So for me, I look at it slightly differently than that, but I think we could probably, talk about this, you and I, offline over a beer for hours and probably never convince each other. But the whole thing about like a playbook, I think you're 100% right. I think the whole concept in my mind of getting a company to sell is scalability. And scalability comes down to not, do I have that old guy who shoots from the hip and has been selling for 40 years but he can never teach anybody? Or can I capture what, 12 guys know, put it into a playbook and teach everybody so people know how to sell? That becomes scalable and that becomes growth, right? So that's the way I look at it anyway. But I think, in my opinion, there's always a guy responsible for or a person responsible for the purchase orders. And either you're a purchase order person or you're not a purchase order person. And if you're not a purchase order person, you're not in sales, in my opinion, right? That's like the way my life has been led.
I love when I see you guys fighting for that. I love that. I mean, I'm coming from the more practical perspective, right? So my goal is to get this brand, so this product in this new market, all right? So obviously, I'm worried about not just the money come in, the volumes. I also worry about the brand, so the product quality. Guess what I have to do? I have to make sure I understand the target consumers there, right? So it's not just my customer, but who are my consumers? Obviously, this is maybe just for consumer packaged goods because they matter, right? So I'm gonna come in from a little bit different angle. I think I believe you guys are both right. So my angle is gonna be coming from the strategy when you look at your product, look at the brand, and this all have to be compensated together. Cannot be just sales volume, right? Because that is not in the long run. Strategically, how you're gonna put your product in front of your customers, your consumers gonna continue to buy, how you're gonna continue to innovate. You're gonna see my angle continue to be innovate. So I would make 3 points on the umbrella of that right strategy statement. So first, we got to make sure that I understand the trend, where the trend is going, right? So, and especially look at the pandemic. I mentioned before, the trend from a shopping behavior perspective, consumers are moving to online. Guess what? Because of that, I know consumers are going to be more safe online. They're going to be more comfortable shipping online. Therefore, I'm not going to spend all my money or my energy in the stores. So therefore, I'm going to ditch some distributors. I'm going to focus on online sales. I'm going to deal with online platform more. So just as one example. So I think figure out the trend, where you're going. Obviously, different product has different application. The second point I want to make is around overall strategy. Are we counting the worst case scenario? Of course, I love the best case scenario, right? So that's what the marketers need to do, make us, go for the big buck, right? So, but have we considered the worst case scenario? If we don't sell here, what are the plan Bs, the backup plan C, plan D? So that is really critical. So I'm a strategy person, right? So you got to look at that overall so we can be prepared, especially in the pandemic. The third one is that let's spend enough time on the worst case scenario, not just on the paper. Figure out if this were happen, who is going to do what and how much money we're going to do. So a very concrete plan that we can actually carry out. So I just want to let's think about what if. So again, overall, when we need to have the right strategy, consider brand, consider consumers, consider who are our target audience, and bring all of them together.
By the way, I love how you started that by saying both of you are right. Very, very Asian of you. It felt very right for me as well.
Well, I will add, Doug, that I felt that we were more in agreement, and I liked that Zach said, let's have a beer, right? The moment you say, let's have a beer, everything's cool. So I'll take you up on the beer time. But, it's like I'm a sales trainer also. I don't know if I mentioned that. I do a lot of training. And when I have salespeople in the room, sometimes it's unsaid, but a lot of times it is said. It's like, oh yeah, big shot, you ever sold anything? You ever sold anything? You're training me to sell? Yes, I've sold a lot, and I've managed a lot of salespeople.
It reminds me, I took an art history course in college, and I think it was Andy Warhol said something like, I can't imagine a situation where I'd get in a fight with another artist. This was like in the 90s or the 80s. And in the 50s, American artists used to be very famous for like Jackson Pollock and other people of that time used to get in these fights all the time over whose art was better. And it's sort of funny. It's like people getting so excited over their particular theory of something that they get, you know, emotional about it. And I think there are lots and lots of different paths and ways of looking at sales. And the bottom line is, in the end of the day, do you get results, right? But it's sort of funny. I'm sure that you're looking at something that works for you exactly right, and it's crystal clear to you, and I'm looking at something that's crystal clear to me, and we both get results. And the important thing is, in the end of the day, you know, there's money involved, right? But it's really interesting how you can come to two very different points of view or philosophies over something like that, right?
Absolutely. And these days, with so many uncertainties and so many things changed, it's hard to predict. It's a story that I don't think I've told online yet, but one of our members left Los Angeles to start a ramen shop a month or two ago in Phoenix, and we helped them with, you know, getting the lawyer and the insurance and all that kind of the background stuff. But I'm thinking in the back of my head, this is not a good time to start a restaurant, you know, and like, so it's like, but you know, we had the conversation, and he was dedicated to do this, and he had a specific plan. Well, guess what? He blew the doors off. You know, he can't make enough food for the number of people. His problem is the opposite problem. He had a great strategy, a great plan. He came into a market with a product. The ramen in Phoenix there's no good ramen shops. He's the only good ramen shop in a big city of, you know, 5 million people. He's got the right product. He had the right approach, and he made it work. And so at the end of the day, there's a lot of ways to, as we say inappropriately, skin the cat, but there's ways to succeed in today's market. So we only have 3 minutes. So I wonder if we could just do a recap for each of you. We'll start with Charles and go to Suzy and then to Zach. Maybe just, you know, 30 to 60 seconds in terms of what are some of the things you want to leave us with based on today's conversation.
So I saved my last observation, and I recognize it's my observation, that if I cut through, Doug, everything that I've been exposed to for many years, but particularly with COVID, it's people, in my humble opinion, the number one obstacle they have to overcome is that little voice in their head. And that little voice, the one that right now is saying, what little voice? That little voice is a lot of chatter, and many studies have shown that it's self-critical. And all I ask people to consider is that you can hear the voice, don't act from the voice, because it's driven by a lot of anxiety. So what am I basically saying? That if I had to say the number one issue I'm seeing with salespeople in particular, is they're arriving at these conversations on Zoom and when they're selling with all that in their head, like people aren't buying, people don't have money, now's a bad time, everyone's afraid, on and on and on. And I just ask people to be patient and just kind of park that to the side and use a system, whatever works for you, that works, and follow that and trust your instincts.
Great insights, great thoughts. Suzy, how about you? What do you think?
I would say know your audience, know the trends in your products and the services you are trying to sell. So that'd be the first point. And then pivot your overall strategy towards it, right? And then lastly, leverage your trusting relationships or other similar services to build trust with your customers or consumers.
Sounds good.
I'm going to agree with Charles in that I think the whole thing is the world economy is not going to collapse. A year from now, we're still going to be here. So don't shrivel up and fear the situation. Keep in mind that we all have to move forward and we have to keep going. And then I'll just finish up with, you know, if you are looking to expand this, to find people on the ground who have existing relationships and trust, it's always worthwhile. You can find me at globalsalesmentor.com or on LinkedIn. I'm happy to chat with anybody, and I can, you know, I'd be happy to talk to people about how to go about doing this.
Sounds good. I'm left with a couple of you touched on this point of the famous Stuart Smalley, Al Franken's character in Saturday Night Live 20 years ago, where he said, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me. You know, which, you know, kept him moving forward, you know, because all of us, especially any of us that have done sales, there's failure involved on a routine basis. And you've got to stay positive at the same time, kind of moving forward. Think of that sushi guy who, you know, just said, look, I'm going to do this and I know it's the right thing. And guess what? You know, it was the right thing. He did a lot of really good things and he made it happen. And so we hope that's happening for you. If, whether it is or not, these are 3 people that you can use as trusted resources. I'm sure any of them would be very happy to have an initial conversation with you and just kind of, you know, pick some ideas that might be able to get you in the right direction, and they might actually be somebody you'd want to partner with going forward. So if you have any trouble finding them in the Global Chamber directory, just send an email to info@globalchamber.org and we'll be very happy to connect you, because they are people that help folks every day be successful. Charles, Suzy, and Zach, you guys are all amazing. This was just as good as my dream had in my head. So I really appreciate you. We need to do this at some point over a beer, or again over.
I don't get a chance to make people's dreams come true that often, Doug. So I'm really happy about this.
And by the way, I did mean to mention when you talked about the beer, we do a virtual dining event at Global Chamber, usually once a month. It's actually, Suzy, out of our Global Chamber Denver chapter, but it's now virtually everywhere. And the next one is on the 24th, I believe, of this month, September. It's a Thursday. That's a 6 p.m. Denver, 5 p.m. Pacific. So it's 7 p.m. Zach, your time, and it's 8 p.m. Charles, your time. So it's, this month theme is Italian. So people will be sitting back with probably Italian wine, maybe an Italian beer, if that's possible, some Italian food, and the global tribe gets together, talks about the food, and talks about a variety of things that come up. So I welcome the 3 of you and welcome anybody who's watching to join us on that Thursday in September, or any month, for virtual dining. And of course, any of the events that we have have Globinars like this that are educational and talk about topics that hopefully help your business. But we also do a lot of different connecting events, whether it's League of Extraordinaries or League of Opportunities. Or an example of a League of Opportunity is next week we have 15 South Korean companies coming into the US that are looking for clients and partners and investors and a variety of people, and we're allowing them to connect up with whoever would like to connect up with them. So we encourage you to attend that on Tuesday, encourage you to be involved, because that's the way you're going to move forward. Thanks everybody for your time. You guys are amazing.
Thank you, Doug. You're always great.
Pleasure to meet you, Charles and Suzy.